18 years. That's how long an entire community searched for a little girl who seemed to vanish into thin air. Thousands of tips were investigated. Search teams covered forests, roads, and remote mountain areas. The FBI followed lead after lead. But the truth was sitting in a place nobody expected. A place authorities would visit again and again without realizing what was hidden just a few steps away. For nearly 2 decades, a missing child lived behind a fence. And when the truth finally came out, it exposed one of the most shocking failures in modern criminal history. This is the story of Jaycee Dugard, a story of disappearance, survival, and a discovery that left an entire nation speechless. June 1991. America was changing. The Cold War was ending. Families were planning summer vacations. Children were counting down the final days of school. In the small mountain community of Meyers, California, life moved at a peaceful pace. Surrounded by forests and located near South Lake Tahoe, it was the kind of place where people felt safe. Neighbors knew one another. Children played outside. Parents rarely worried about danger waiting around the corner. Among those children was 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard. Friends described her as cheerful and energetic. She loved spending time outdoors. She had dreams, plans, and an entire future ahead of her. To everyone who knew her, she was simply a normal kid, enjoying life. Nothing about the morning of June 10th suggested that history was about to change forever. It was supposed to be another ordinary school day. Jaycee left home and headed toward her usual bus stop. The distance was short, just a brief walk she had taken many times before. Her stepfather watched from nearby. Everything seemed normal. Then suddenly a car appeared. Within seconds, an unknown man stepped out. Before anyone fully understood what was happening, the stranger grabbed Jaycee and forced her into the vehicle. The entire attack happened so quickly that witnesses barely had time to react. One moment she was standing at the bus stop. The next moment she was gone. Her stepfather immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Desperately trying to stop the vehicle, he chased after it. But the car disappeared. And with it, Jaycee disappeared too. Moments later, emergency calls were made. Police officers rushed to the scene. Investigators began interviewing witnesses. Roadblocks were considered. Search teams were assembled. Everyone believed the child would be found quickly. After all, someone had to know something. Someone had to recognize the vehicle. Someone had to remember a face. But hours passed. Then days. Then weeks. And every promising lead ended the same way. Nothing. The small community found itself trapped inside a growing nightmare. Missing posters appeared across California. News coverage expanded. Volunteers joined search efforts. People who had never met Jaycee prayed for her safe return. But despite all the attention, investigators remained stuck. No reliable suspect. No confirmed location. No evidence explaining where she had gone. As months turned into years, hope became harder to maintain. Some people believed she would eventually be found. Others feared the worst. Yet one person refused to stop believing. Jaycee's mother. No matter how much time passed, she continued hoping that her daughter was still alive somewhere. She could not know that the answer to the mystery was already unfolding hundreds of miles away, because while investigators searched mountains, highways, and neighboring states, the man responsible was quietly building a hidden world, a world designed to keep a secret buried forever. And inside that hidden world, Jaycee was still alive. What nobody knew was that the kidnapper already had a disturbing criminal history. Years before Jaycee disappeared, he had committed crimes so serious that many believed he should never have been free again. Yet somehow he was back in society, and nobody investigating the disappearance realized just how close they were to uncovering the truth. Because while the search continued in Meyers, a dangerous man was preparing for something that would remain hidden for nearly 2 decades. And the location where he planned to hide his secret would become one of the most infamous backyards in American criminal history. That backyard sat behind an ordinary-looking home in Antioch, California. From the street, nothing seemed unusual. But behind the fences, a very different reality was beginning to take shape. A very different reality was beginning to take shape. The home looked ordinary. Neighbors saw a quiet suburban property like hundreds of others across Northern California. Cars came and went. People walked their dogs. Families went about their daily lives. Nothing about the house suggested it would eventually become the center of one of America's most shocking criminal cases. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the main house stood a series of hidden areas shielded from view. Over time, barriers were added. Coverings were installed. Structures appeared where outsiders could not easily see them. The further those hidden areas expanded, the further Jaycee was separated from the world she once knew. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and eventually, months became years. Back in Meyers, investigators continued searching. Every possible lead received attention. Witness reports arrived from different cities. Potential sightings were investigated. Law enforcement agencies followed countless tips. Many sounded promising at first. None produced answers. For Jaycee's family, every phone call brought hope. Every reported sighting created anticipation. Every new lead felt like it could finally bring her home. Then each lead collapsed. Again and again. The emotional toll became enormous. Meanwhile, life inside the hidden compound followed an entirely different reality. The outside world moved forward. New presidents entered office. Technology changed. Children grew into adults. Entire generations experienced events that Jaycee never saw. Years passed without her participating in normal life. The freedom most people take for granted simply didn't exist. Yet despite everything, she survived. And survival became its own form of resistance. As the years continued passing, another unexpected development changed the situation completely. Jaycee became a mother. Then later she became a mother again. The responsibility of protecting her children gave her a new purpose. Every decision she made was no longer only about herself. Now there were young lives depending on her. According to later accounts, that responsibility became one of the strongest motivations helping her endure impossible circumstances. While this was happening behind closed fences, authorities responsible for monitoring dangerous offenders believed everything was under control. That belief would later raise serious questions. Questions that would shock the public once the truth emerged. The man responsible for Jaycee's disappearance was not an unknown figure hiding from authorities. His name already existed in official records. His criminal history was documented. His background was known. And yet somehow the system repeatedly failed to recognize what was happening. Years after the kidnapping, officials responsible for supervision conducted routine visits connected to his parole status. Paperwork was completed. Reports were filed. Boxes were checked. Everything appeared normal, at least on paper. But reality was very different. The problem was simple. Nobody looked closely enough. A quick conversation at the front door can create the illusion that everything is fine. A completed form can create the appearance of success, but neither reveals what may be happening behind closed gates. As the years passed, opportunities to uncover the truth came and went, one after another. And every missed opportunity allowed the nightmare to continue. Perhaps the most frustrating part of the story is how close some people came to discovering the truth. There were moments when warning signs appeared, moments when unusual details caught attention, moments when questions should have been asked. Yet somehow the answers remained hidden. By the mid-2000s, more than a decade had passed since Jaycee disappeared. Many missing child cases eventually fade from public attention. This one was no different. Media coverage became less frequent. New cases replaced old headlines. The world moved on. But Jaycee's family never truly stopped searching. They never stopped wondering. They never stopped hoping. And unknown to them, the answer was still waiting. Not across the country. Not overseas. Not somewhere impossible to find. The answer had been sitting in the same place for years. Then came a moment that almost changed everything. A local concern was reported. Information reached authorities suggesting unusual activity connected to the property. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough. It wasn't a major investigation. It was simply the kind of information that normally deserves a closer look, an opportunity, a chance to discover what had remained hidden for so long. Officers responded. Questions were asked. The property received attention. And for a brief moment, it seemed possible that the mystery might finally end. But it didn't. The opportunity slipped away. The hidden area remained hidden. The people living there remained unseen. And once again, everyone walked away without realizing how close they had come. Years continued passing. Then another opportunity appeared. Another investigation. Another chance. And once again, the truth survived unnoticed. At this point, nearly 18 years had passed since that summer morning in Meyers. 18 years since a little girl vanished while waiting for her school bus. 18 years since a family's world changed forever. Nobody could imagine that the breakthrough would eventually come from a place completely unrelated to the original investigation. It wouldn't start with advanced forensic technology. It wouldn't begin with a new witness. And it wouldn't come from one of the agencies that had spent years searching. Instead, it would begin with a simple meeting. A meeting that immediately gave one person a strange feeling that something wasn't right. And that feeling would change everything. August 2009. Nearly 18 years had passed since Jaycee disappeared. Most people believed the case would never be solved. Missing child investigations rarely remain active in the public imagination for that long. But fate was quietly moving events toward a conclusion nobody could have predicted. On a university campus in Northern California, a man arrived requesting permission for a religious gathering. At first glance, it seemed routine. Just another request. Just another visitor. But something felt off. The man's behavior immediately stood out. His mannerisms. The way he spoke. The intensity with which he discussed his beliefs. Nothing he said directly pointed to a crime. Yet something about the situation created concern. The feeling was difficult to explain. Sometimes experience tells you something isn't right long before evidence appears. That instinct caused university staff to take a closer look. And that decision would eventually accomplish what countless investigations had failed to do. A background check was conducted. What appeared on the screen immediately raised alarms. The man had a serious criminal history. A history involving violent offenses. A history that demanded attention. Suddenly, the strange behavior no longer seemed harmless. Questions began forming. More importantly, investigators noticed something that didn't make sense. The people accompanying him raised concerns. Their behavior seemed unusual. Their interactions felt unusual. The entire situation created more questions than answers. Instead of ignoring those concerns, officials decided to keep looking. That choice changed history. Within days, additional interviews were arranged. Conversations became more detailed. Investigators carefully observed everyone involved. No dramatic confrontation occurred. No movie-style arrest took place. Instead, authorities allowed the situation to unfold naturally. The goal was simple. Gather information, identify inconsistencies, understand what was really happening. As questioning continued, cracks slowly began appearing. Small contradictions emerged. Details failed to line up. Answers created even more questions. Investigators sensed they were standing on the edge of something significant. What they didn't yet realize was just how significant. Then came the moment that changed everything. A young woman was asked routine questions. Simple questions. Questions most people answer without hesitation. But her responses immediately caught investigators' attention. Something wasn't adding up. The story being presented did not fit the facts. The deeper authorities looked, the more suspicious everything became. Years of secrecy were beginning to unravel. For nearly 2 decades, an entire hidden reality had existed behind fences and locked gates. Now that reality was starting to collapse. As investigators continued separating individuals and comparing statements, the truth became impossible to hide. The breakthrough had finally arrived. The mystery that had haunted California since 1991 was about to be solved. Then came the confession. The words investigators never expected to hear. The words that instantly transformed an ordinary interview into one of the most shocking moments in modern criminal history. In that moment, 18 years of unanswered questions suddenly had answers. The missing girl everyone had searched for was alive. Alive, after nearly 2 decades. Alive. The realization stunned everyone involved. Investigators, officials, family members. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. The child who vanished in 1991 had survived. But the surprises were only beginning. Authorities soon discovered that Jaycee was no longer the 11-year-old girl shown on missing posters. She was now an adult woman. A woman who had spent 18 years living inside circumstances nobody should ever experience. And she was not alone. 2 children were also part of the story. A discovery that added another heartbreaking layer to an already unbelievable case. As the reality sank in, emergency plans were put into motion. Protection, medical evaluations, support services, everything needed to help someone transition from nearly 2 decades of isolation back into society. But before any of that could happen, there was one phone call that had to be made. A phone call 18 years in the making. On the other end of that call was a mother who had never stopped believing. A mother who spent years wondering whether her daughter was alive. A mother who had endured birthdays, holidays, and painful anniversaries without answers. Then the impossible happened. She heard her daughter's voice. For the first time in 18 years. Imagine that moment. Imagine hearing a voice you feared was gone forever. Imagine realizing that hope had been right all along. No words could fully capture it. No camera could truly record it. It was the kind of moment that changes a family forever. Soon afterward, an emotional reunion took place. Tears flowed. Questions flooded everyone's minds. And a family finally received the miracle they had been waiting nearly 2 decades to experience. But while the reunion brought overwhelming joy, it also created a new question. A question that would soon dominate headlines across America. How had this happened? How had a convicted offender managed to hide such a massive crime for 18 years? How had warning signs been missed again and again? How had authorities come so close to discovering the truth only to walk away each time? Those questions would soon trigger intense public scrutiny, and the answers would reveal a chain of failures almost as shocking as the crime itself. Because when investigators finally examined everything that had happened over those 18 years, they discovered a pattern of missed opportunities that was impossible to ignore. And the public reaction was immediate. As news of Jaycee's rescue spread across America, people celebrated the fact that she had been found alive. But alongside that celebration came anger. A lot of anger. The more details investigators uncovered, the harder it became to understand how this nightmare had remained hidden for so long. Reporters began examining records. Officials reviewed old reports. Questions were asked at every level, and the answers revealed something deeply troubling. Over the years, numerous opportunities existed to uncover the truth. Opportunities that could have ended the nightmare much earlier. Yet somehow each opportunity slipped away, one after another. The public learned that the man responsible had not been hiding from authorities. He had been known to them. His criminal history was already documented. His past crimes were already on record. People began asking the same question. If authorities knew who he was, why wasn't closer attention given to his activities? As those questions intensified, criminal proceedings moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming. Investigators now understood exactly who had committed the kidnapping. They understood what had happened over the 18 years that followed. And they understood the enormous damage caused by those crimes. The legal case quickly became one of the most closely watched cases in the country. Every hearing attracted media attention. Every development generated headlines. People wanted justice. Not years later. Not eventually. Now, meanwhile, Jaycee faced a completely different challenge. After spending nearly 2 decades in isolation, she had to learn how to navigate a world that had changed dramatically. The world she remembered from 1991 no longer existed. Technology was different. Society was different. Everything was different. Most people never think about how much the world changes in 18 years. For Jaycee, those changes happened all at once. Yet those who worked with her noticed something remarkable. Despite everything she had endured, she demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Rather than allowing the past to define her future, she focused on rebuilding her life, step by step, day by day. The criminal case eventually moved toward a conclusion. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the individuals responsible ultimately admitted guilt. For Jaycee and her family, that admission mattered. It meant they would not be forced to relive every detail through a lengthy public trial. It meant another painful chapter could finally begin closing. When sentencing arrived, emotions filled the courtroom. Years of suffering, years of unanswered questions, years of waiting, all leading to this moment. The judge delivered a sentence that ensured the man responsible would spend the remainder of his life behind bars. A sentence measured not in years, but in lifetimes. The message was clear. The crimes committed against Jaycee would never be forgotten. For many people, the sentencing represented justice. But justice could never return the years that had been stolen. Nothing could. No court ruling, no prison sentence, no public apology. 18 years had been taken away forever. And yet, something extraordinary happened after the case ended. Jaycee refused to let her story end with victimhood. Instead, she chose a different path. A path focused on healing. A path focused on helping others. She eventually shared her experiences with the world, providing insight into survival, resilience, and recovery. Her story helped people understand something important. Survival is not always dramatic. Sometimes survival means enduring. Sometimes it means protecting hope when hope seems impossible. And sometimes it means finding the strength to keep moving forward long after unimaginable trauma. The case also forced major discussions about supervision failures and accountability. Questions about oversight. Questions about missed warning signs. Questions about how dangerous individuals are monitored. Those discussions eventually led to legal action and significant consequences. The failures surrounding the case became impossible to ignore. For many observers, the tragedy was not only what one criminal had done, it was also the number of opportunities that existed to stop him sooner, opportunities that might have saved years of suffering. Years later, people still discuss the case for one simple reason. It feels almost impossible to believe. An 11-year-old girl disappears while waiting for a school bus. An entire community searches for answers. Authorities spend years investigating, yet the truth remains hidden in a backyard. Not across the ocean, not in another country, in a backyard. Sometimes the most shocking mysteries are not hidden in distant places. Sometimes they exist in locations everyone overlooks. The story of Jaycee Dugard remains one of the most extraordinary survival stories in modern American history, not because of the darkness of what happened, but because of what happened afterward. Because after 18 years of captivity, she survived. After 18 years of uncertainty, her family got their miracle. And after 18 years of silence, the truth finally came to light. For the people of Meyers, California, the memory of that summer morning in 1991 will never completely disappear. Neither will the lesson that came from it. That hope can survive longer than anyone expects. That the truth can remain hidden for years. And that sometimes, even the coldest cases can still find their ending. But only when someone finally notices the detail everyone else missed. The detail that changes everything. The detail that brings someone home.